There we go. Good. Twitch is receiving data. That's a good start. Always a good start. And it is a Friday edition of the CodeZone. Welcome. I don't know where I'm looking. Where's my camera? There it is. Excellent. Good. I'm definitely getting more accustomed to this live streaming lark. We've got a few people in the chat already. We've got Dandestein, Christoph, Null Alternative. Hello. De Sage. Good evening. Apostolisk is here, hello. We've also got Magetsub and Danny sort of creeping around in the background somewhere. And I've got what we pretty much left the stream at last time. That's where we're at, aren't we? Yes, you can see I'm completely ready for this tonight. I've been sort of rushing it a little bit. In fact, it's just water. That's how miserable it's going to be. But I did think I would start with something rather pleasant. I've just recorded some room ambience. Now, those on the Discord may have just heard it, but I'm going to play it anyway. So all sorts going on outside. I'm just going to turn that down before we get a notification and it deafens you all. Right, so that was that. Let's get rid of you for now. What did we do last time? Well, we started playing with planet selection and object selection. Yeah, somebody needs to sample that and turn it into, well, I don't know. We need an official jingle for the CodeZone, don't we? Well, I have a confession to make. I did a little bit more work on it after the stream and tried to just tidy it up a bit so we can move on to sort of the next major part. And of course, I will talk us through the changes that I've made, and we'll also perhaps, well, the idea tonight is to try and place some new objects, and the one thing I want to place, of course, is the satellites that we've been developing. So we've got all of that sort of tech that we worked on for a few episodes, but we now need to bring it into our new ECS system, Entity Component System framework. Sick nature beats. No hot Vimto tonight. Didn't they want to put data collection into Audacity? I don't know. Somebody's just taken over Audacity, haven't they? Somebody with a bit of a background in audio applications. I remember reading about it. It was meant to be good news. I presume it's still good news. I don't know. Dragon Eye, hello. Yes, welcome. I best put the CodeZone chat on in the background on Discord. Right, so what have we got here? Well, right now we've got a cluster of objects orbiting the sun, and I can pan and zoom as before. I've fixed the background a little bit now, so the parallax effect is a little bit more realistic than it was previously. The thing that I wanted to point out, though, was there's two state machines going on. One is controlling the modality, which is going to be ongoing for a few episodes. And the other one I've thrown in sort of last minute is one to control the camera. And we worked on selecting objects, and I can indeed select an object, but there's just a cool effect I wanted to demonstrate first. Is right now it just looks like a fairly static cluster of objects rotating around the sun. When I select one of these objects, it's going to lock onto that object. So I'll be able to zoom, but I won't be able to pan anymore. Here we go. Yoink. And it's when it's locked on, you start to see all of the relative movements between the planets. I think it's quite nice. And as you click on things, the camera sort of pans with a little bit of a tween in between the objects. And one of the things you can do is you can select an object, as we have done here. If I click out into space, it deselects and you go back into sort of free camera mode. And I can click on an object, and if I press the S key, I go into sort of a placement mode. So I can still zoom. Remember, I've locked onto the planet, and I can specify a radius, and I can specify an angle. And if I click, there we are, we've put an object related to the one that we've just had selected. It automatically selected the new object. And I can click back on the original one, and we can place another one. And again. And rather in a silly fashion, I've made it so that each time we place an object, it's going to be 3/4 of the size of the one before it. I just wanted some way of differentiating between the objects. So we can have all sorts of interesting movement patterns. Now, I'm not going to keep this feature. I was just experimenting with how to use the ECS in different ways. Anyway, I think it's quite nice. It's smooth. It's intuitive to use. You can go and play the demo in the browser. It is exactly this. It's the usual address with space thing at the end. Let me catch up with some of the chats. So, Alta, hello. Hermes, hello. Ashtar, hello. Super Art Yuk, hello. Gruffler, hello. Julian, hello. Dangerous Tuber, hello. Friday nights are busy. Berg12, hello. Volian, hello. Yes, so one of the things that I want to sort of throw a credit at it is I'm actually implementing a variation of Ericsson's camera code, which you may recall, I think in sort of episode 2 or 3, that's when he sort of donated a lerped camera. And I have used that, so I'm going to place a planet all the way out here. And if I select one over here, see, it takes 1 second to move between the selected objects, and it does it purely linearly. So it's not quite the same as Ericsson's code, but it's certainly inspired by it. And I think the user interface is starting to become quite intuitive. I like it. I like it a lot. Giovanni, hello. Oskidan, hello. Mohammed3297, hello. Yeah, I think so, Dragon Knight. I think it is starting to look good. I'm just a little bit unsure about the planet selection ring these days, but the selection thing here, this white thing, it's just a decal, so it's a pre-made image. The image looks like that in Affinity Photo, and I'm just scaling and rotating that decal according to where the mouse cursor is relative to the center of the planet. So as you can see, the center bulb of the base of the arrow also expands. That's because I'm just enlarging the decal. Ideally, you'd probably want to keep this drawn as some sort of wireframe effect, and we can look at doing the polish on this later on. But right now, not too fussed about doing things like that. To put a planet over there. Yes, very good. Can you please paste the URL of the... Oh, there we go. Thank you, Dandestein. Much appreciated. One of the things I've noticed on the web-based version is sometimes, and I've yet to work out why, sometimes you can place a planet you can't select. There's also lots of other quirks as well. So one of the things to be wary of here is you can create infinitely... you can just keep adding more and more planets. And if you keep adding them in a chain, you start to get interesting effects to the maths. So let's zoom in a little bit here and just keep doing this. Right. What tends to happen now is you'll start to see things becoming a little bit jerky and a little bit unstable. And we can keep zooming in. We're sort of hitting precision limits at this rate, but we're also hitting limits with what the camera can do and the nature of its lerp. So if I go and click on these planets now, you'll see the lerp, well, maybe you can't really see it, it's a bit quick. If you stir at it long enough, the lerp isn't in a straight line. It sort of does a loop-the-loop. And that's because the lerp has a lot more work to do. And there was a discussion between myself and Ericsson about sort of fixing this in the CodeZone chat on the Discord. There's another quirk as well. Right now, remember, we can select anything that's within the planets. It always chooses sort of the most recently selected one, but we didn't have any sort of immediate break out of the selection loop. So yes, be careful about placing lots of planets. Of course, in the actual game scenario, we will restrict this. We're not going to be placing planets so much. In fact, we're going to be placing everything at really the same layer and level. We'll certainly have restrictions on that. And we'll also have restrictions on things like how far you can zoom out, because obviously that's no good to anybody. Let me just click out into... there we go. So, we don't want people to sort of see the edges of the universe, so we'll have some restriction there. Likewise, we don't want people to be able to zoom in so far that the graphics start to fall apart too. So we need to sort of play within these happy zones. Hello, Speedy. I can't remember if we said hello, Speedy, already, but we have to say hello, Speedy. 13 digits, hello. Anwan, hello. Yes, Morris, fix it. That's true. The Emscripten port is done by the members of the community, but in particular it was first put together by Magetsub and Dandestein, but really is kind of maintained now by Morris, so thank you, Morris, for that. Is your camera always in lerp mode? Should it just change to match the planet's permission after lerping? Well, it does. So it does that already. But it does it by basically lerping with a T of 1, and Dandystein will understand that, and anybody that's done any kind of lerping will also understand that too. So the camera is kind of locked into the position. You can see you don't get any jitter here, but if I go and select one of these really tiny planets, I have to be careful, there we go, and start to zoom in, you do start to get some interesting effects. A little bit more investigation needed behind what's going on there. I think the camera is probably not quite right yet, but it's good enough. It only sort of kicks in at a certain level of zoom too. But I liked the sort of clamping and the lerping because it allowed you to sort of navigate in an intuitive way without getting lost too easily. TewDeepV6. Didn't know you're on Twitch as well. Yes, occasionally I do a bit of Twitch streaming. In fact, at the moment it's every Tuesday and Friday. So yes, I've noticed what I was saying is in the browser version there are some slight differences in behaviour. Now, I'm not too worried about things twitching and jumping around. That's par for the course. Firstly, I think, is that also because it's not really using 64-bit numbers? Need an Inscriptum expert to sort of work on that. But I was also wondering why one of the planets could be created and not be selectable. There's certainly no reason in my code why that would be the case. The only thing I could think of is that some memory request was denied in time or something by the browser. It needs investigation. It was a very sort of a quick look at it. Yeah, Morris, I think it's a precision problem. It's not too... It's okay. It won't actually be a problem in the final game, but it's just I know that some of the nerds trying this stuff will immediately try and find all of the problems they can with it. So it's getting ahead of the curve a little bit. All the planets orbit in the same direction. Yes, at the moment they just orbit clockwise. That's fine. The orbit is artificial. It's a polar coordinate with an ever expanding. Sort of theta. So the theta just rotates like this. There's no sort of relationship between mass or distance or anything like that yet. Not too bothered about it. Different planet textures. Yeah, we do kind of need some different planet textures. Is this an object-oriented stream? In a way, it was. Less so now, I think. We've kind of moved to doing it with an entity component system. Right, okay, so I'll show you some of the code. That's where it gets the interesting bits. And when we were last working on this, we just started to... what have we done? We've done planet selected, and that was basically it. So we had this system selectables system, which went through all of the entities, checked to see if we had a collision with the mouse, and if we had, it chose that specific entity. And we highlighted it pink. I then moved on a little bit to sort of think about what's the state machine actually doing here. So I had a state called select planet. And select planet is the sort of navigatable state. Remember, we decided that idle didn't really do anything. Select planet is that one where we can enable the selection of planets. And when we're in select planet mode, I've now got a secondary state machine which controls the camera. And the camera is in free pan and zoom mode. So that's where we can use the middle mouse button and we can scroll to zoom. And I think I will add some inertia to the zoom, and we can pan by dragging with the middle mouse. But you'll notice that basically this first level of state machine is just handling user input. So if the mouse is clicked, and I can do this now. There we go. If the mouse is clicked, that's going to run our system on our collection of entities, looking for all the ones which were selectable. If it doesn't select anything, it returned a null, and that's fine, nothing happens. But if it does select something, it returns the entity that we've selected. But then I need to go to my next state. So I tell my state machine, right, next frame, next iteration, I need you to operate in a different manner. You're going to operate in planet selected mode. I also set this variable, which is camera lerp time. I reset my camera. So the camera's linear interpolation between where it currently is and where it needs to go is governed by the fact that lerp time is a value between 0 and 1. And we'll have a look at that in a minute. So once we've selected a planet, I then go to the planet selected state on the next frame. Now, in planet selected, I change to a different camera mode now. This is planet lock. Now, planet lock means I can't do the panning. I can still do the zooming, but the camera is now centered on the planet's coordinate. And again, we just do user input stuff here. So if I press the S key, which is for satellite or space station, then it can go into this choose orbital location. Now, it may be that we need to rejig some of these states later on. Choose orbital location, we'll have a look at in a second. If I press the left mouse button, I'll update the number here. There we go. If we press the left mouse button on some other planet in this case, then a different planet is chosen and the camera lerp time is reset to 0. So even though I've locked onto a planet, I can still select other planets. That's what allowed us to sort of zip between one planet and the next. It was quite a nice feature. If I left click and nothing is selected, then I've just clicked in empty space. In which case, I go back to my regular select planet mode and reset my camera mode. In fact, I probably don't need to do that reset anymore because it's the first thing that's done in that particular state. A little bit of a rule of thumb when it comes to state machines is in each state you really only want to change as few things as possible. Oh, hang on, shouldn't have clicked on that. That was a bad thing to click. So doing things like this redundant cam mode here, that's not necessary. We could take that out. In fact, I'll comment that out for now. Right, let me have a quick catch up with the chat whilst I have a sip of water. Oh, flipping heck, quite a lot of chats. Hang on. What are you coding? We're coding a engine, really, a gaming engine for the simulation of a solar system, and it's going to be a solar system that has a trading aspect to it and a production chain aspect to it, a bit like SimCity in space, I think is the best way to describe it. Only circular orbits. Any plans on supporting eccentric orbits? Possibly. We could change the entity to see how that happens. One of the advantages of circular orbits is they are incredibly predictable. That might actually be useful. What's the way ent is pronounced? Ent as a word or NTT? Well, I just call it ent. Played with this in the browser version, thought the smaller planets were the ones that could not be selectable. There will be a point where you get so small that the mouse coordinate cannot be translated into the space coordinate system accurately. So you'll find areas you can't collect. But I found it was actually sort of the second tier of planets, big, clumsy, selectable objects. There was occasionally just one you couldn't select. And I'm not the only person. Somebody mentioned it on the Discord too. Ah, Gorbit's here. Hello. RHK77. Hello. Slice. Hello. Yeah, the wiggling of the planets in the camera seems to settle out and stop after 2 to 3 seconds. That's because I don't know why it's 2 to 3 seconds. I could understand it being 1. Maybe it could be 2 to 3. Depends what scaling coefficients I've got on the lerp. Are you using graphics engine OpenGL for drawing things? Yes. Well, I'm using the Pixel game engine, which is my own sort of wrapper for two-dimensional drawing. Isn't it nowadays the case that doubles are actually faster in computations than floats? Probably not. It's probably neck and neck. I mean, there'll be dedicated silicon for both, so it depends what the CPU is, well, what the compiler has decided the CPU should use. There you go, Dancy. In the web version, the first planet you place is never selectable. That's interesting. Let's see if what's that like on this version then, because I think that was how I saw it too. So if I select that one, create a planet, and then go back. No, you see, it does seem to be in the web-based one, and I can't account for it. So there is a discrepancy there. I'm hoping it's not Ent trying to be too clever, doing things with memory in the background, that we've not found the right combination of flags to give in Scripton. Annicator, hello. Do you need a big number library to get more precision to avoid? No, we don't. The jitter is happening at the extremes in this instance. We'll never see them in game. It's only when you start deliberately trying to explore the boundaries of that precision that you start to see some of the problems with it. So no, I'm not fussed. And a lot of those problems are amplified by the lerping camera, and that's also a critical bit of information. That you do want the camera to be able to sort of zip between the two planets. So that was that when you select a planet and you're already in the select planet state, that's why you can zip like this, which I think will be very useful for navigating. So I'm going to keep that in. So then we had this choose orbital location state. Now this is the state that pops up this arrow and a circle, so you can sort of choose an orbital plane and you can choose where to position the object upon that orbital circumference. Now this uses the same camera mode as before, planet lock, and it's basically looking at the position in space and it's creating a polar coordinate out of that position. In fact, these are a little bit out of date now because I've added to this version of the Pixel Game Engine Megetsub's polar coordinate code. Well, actually not quite, I changed it a bit. Sorry Megetsub, but I stole your idea. We'll leave it at that. You can take solace in that. And the idea in this case is if you press the right mouse button when you're trying to draw or place an orbital location, it just cancels the operation. It goes back to the original state. The planet remains selected, but we're still back in this state. When you press the left mouse button, then of course we want to confirm the fact that we're placing an object. And at the moment I'm just placing a planet at that location. So in order to do that, I get the planet which is currently selected. I need to know its size. So I get the component attached to that entity, which represents what the planet is. It describes the physical dimensions of the planet. And then I create a new entity called marker. And I set that marker to also be a planet. That's why it renders like a planet, by giving it a planet component. And I specify that radius to be, yes, 3/4 of the originally selected planet. You can see it using the graphics pool that we created in the previous episode to index, work out what it needs to look like. And we add all of the other components that makes it a legitimate planet by all means. It's got this orbital component here, so it knows that it's got to orbit around some primary. And of course that planet too is also selectable. I then made a decision, a bit of a design decision, to actually deliberately set the selected planet to be the one that you've just placed. I felt that that was a little bit more useful because you would click and then immediately the planets you just placed start moving around. They may become slightly more difficult to place. When all is said and done, reset the camera alert time and slide over to the next planet. And that's all I've got for my state machine so far. Doesn't do very much. But there's a second state machine. And this is the camera mode. So we've got these two camera modes. One, which we saw these functions in a previous episode. This one's just handling the pan and zoom for regular space. And here we've got the lerp. So the lerp is happening, I guess it is deliberately slowed down a little bit here. But then it's rather unusually, we'll have a look at the function in a minute. So the camera lerp t, this is the t coordinate in your parametric representation of the camera's position. The t coordinate is clamped, so it goes between 0 and 1, and 0 being the original location and 1 being the destination. And that is used in this next function, handle camera planet lock. Now, I think these functions will be broken out to actually exist in these case statements later on. So that way we can see all of the camera code in one place, rather than having it broken out. So there's a little bit of a design change there. So we'll just have a quick glance at these camera functions. There's nothing particularly interesting about them. So in free pan and zoom mode, it is exactly what we saw before. We can pan and zoom with the middle mouse button and we can scroll. And the camera just gets set to wherever the transform view in the background is suggesting that the world space exists. I don't know if Ent has been officially tested to work on Inscription. It's not a library of any description. It's purely just a header file. So it's just straight up C code, well, C++ code. Yeah, I think that's Annie. You're right. There's some nice intuitive stuff happening, and that's what I'm aiming for. So I'm reading back in some of the chat here. Are you using doubles or floats? Pretty much doubles. Yeah, strange thing. So Julian and Anderson have identified the same bug. Yeah, I don't know. It's probably something a lot more obvious than we think. It might be something to do with the update rate. Potentially, I could check to see if there's a VSync issue. Is it that the mouse click is not working? I mean, it's odd that it places the planet at all, but for some reason just doesn't give it this selectable component. Don't know why. Graphic idea. Make planet shadow be a semi-transparent sprite that will be put on the planets. That's how it's done. Where's that? Rupert 2000. Well, thank you very much. This is very kind of you. Yes, we're doing a few more Twitch streams at the moment. If you've seen my latest video on YouTube, you'll understand why. Super RTK, that's is exactly what I'm already doing. Loving this series. This is obviously an Xbox gamer overlord. No problem. Pleasure for you to be here. Thank you very much. Good. Well, I'm glad you're all playing with the web version at least. There's a link floating around somewhere in the chats. Maybe if somebody can repost it again just to give other people a chance to have a play with it. So yes, the second camera one is this handle camera planet lock. So this is when we've selected a planet, we only want to allow zooming. So you can see I've got the same code, but I don't have the panning part of the code. So this is the panning part. That's gone away. That becomes fixed by getting the position of the entity and just basically zooming to that location. And then I implement Ericsson's camera. Which is this. It's not quite Ericsson's camera because Ericsson squared camera lerp time. So there's some games to play to fine-tune this a little bit. I think there should be a relationship between the lerp time integration rate. It should probably be related to the distance that it actually needs to lerp. That was something we were experimenting with yesterday. Ericsson's already put more maths on the Discord server. I need to go away and digest that. So we have those two camera modes. Now, that's two state machines so far. Right, the first state machine was the actually what's the user interface. So this is the modality state machine. How does the user interact with the application? Then this secondary state machine was how is the camera working depending on what camera state is in. That's a completely separate state machine. But now we have a third state machine, which is the same as the first state machine, but it's chosen just for what is drawn. And I wanted this to be separate because it's quite nice at the moment that you can keep all of the user interaction code in one place and keep the drawing completely separate. That's a nice way to partition the problem. Now, it does mean you see a little bit of duplication. So the idle state, which we never use, we're just drawing what we can see. In both the selected planet and planet selected states, we draw the same thing. Orbital location, we draw the same thing again. It may be that we always choose to use these. However, if we're in a menu or something, perhaps we don't want to choose these. If we're on a map screen, maybe it's all a bit different. Who knows? Don't know. So I don't mind this duplication recalling of the function. That's how a state machine should work. But when we're in this orbital location, we've got an additional decal to draw. It's this sort of growing circular one with the white arrow. So I just set the decal mode to be additive. I draw my special decal, which is this orbit marker. I draw it at the location which we're storing. That's the start, so that's the middle of the decal, and I'm rotating it. That's why I'm using draw rotated decal to where my mouse cursor currently is in space. And that's it. That's the end. The only thing left to do is to display some information on the screen, which is this drawstring, and then I update my states. Now, if you're not familiar with state machines, this is the critical part. State now equals state next. It's very tempting to just immediately set state now to whatever you want it to be. But you shouldn't, right? Because if I'm in my user states up here, doing things, if I just said, well, state now is choose orbital location, then subsequent state machine functions won't happen in the same epoch. Right? So that's quite an important distinction, that we now have some confidence that no matter what state that we're going to move into, we're not going to upset the current frame's worth of processing and drawing and everything else. It only happens on the next frame. So breaking your state machines up into a now and a next is essential for a proper state machine to work. Oh, a bit of chatting there. Why multiplying by 1? I was experimenting with different numbers, including squaring the zoom. I'll tell you what, I'll show you the squaring. Where is it? There we go. So I believe it's probably why am I multiplying the camera lerp time by this 1. Well, those that know how I code, and it frustrates them immensely, know that I like to sort of code quite visually. So I don't mind having things like multiply by 1 in code, because it tells me, well, hang on, there's the scope to do something there. There's a number that can be changed or tweaked or something. Now, I'll show you the differences it makes. Now, I think it's quite a nice effect, but it does sort of enhance some of the problems we were talking about earlier. So see, we get like a slower, smoother pan now. Let me place another planet so we can zip between them. All right, so that starts to look quite nice, right? It's a more measured movement. Let's put another one in. There we go. So we've got 3 things to pan around. The problem it's got is that the lerp needs to work a bit harder still. Now, it's lerping from where the planet was to where the planet is. Now, that where the planet was has changed, and because we're not lerping quite as fast, you end up with this sort of loop as it gets to the next location. So if I go between these 3, you'll see there's like a little jitter at the start if it's unfavourable depending on where the planets are currently rotating at the moment. So even though it gives you this nice smooth transition between the planets, the path that it takes is no longer as nice, I don't think. So I quite liked the linear path. I'm sure that is absolutely a matter of opinion. Now if we start placing some more planets, the problem becomes a little bit more pronounced. So you can start to see you don't necessarily, there we go, see, you don't necessarily take a straight line. You take some weird curve to get to the destination. That one, we even went backwards before we got there. Oh, yeah. And that's what you'd expect. The path, I guess, is a quadratic path now rather than a linear path. Yeah, state machines are awesome. They're exactly right, Christoph. They're easy to implement and they're incredibly powerful. The only problem is they tend to be quite verbose, and that's what puts a lot of people off. And then people go, well, hang on, I've got loads of verbosity here, and it looks like a lot of my things are doing the same thing. I need to start encapsulating everything, and then they start getting more and more objects involved, and then it becomes this sort of hybrid of states and objects in a state machine, and that's fine, but nothing wrong with a bit of duplication when you want to sort of visually see that 2 states are quite similar except for some small difference. I don't mind having a function written in there twice. What happens when the planets move onwards while lerping? Well, the target one is always being detected, so it's not like it's going, right, you must go to that location, and then by the time it gets there, the planet has moved. It's always updating itself to the new planet location, and that becomes part of the problem. That's why this path isn't that straight. What isn't the same is the starting location. The starting location happens once, but then the planet moves, and it moves a lot faster than perhaps you get to see in this view that we've constructed. So I think a lot of the weirdness in how this camera moves around is related to the start location being immediately some fixed point in space. If I click on this planet here, we've actually moved a fair bit quite quickly. See, we're moving around the sun quite quickly, but it's still lerping from that original point in space. We could probably change that to knowing what the entity was that we were moving from. It just needs to be a bit smarter there. And if you've ever done state machines properly, and properly, a state machine isn't a thing done in C++, it's a thing done in hardware. If you've ever actually tried to do that, you'll realise that state machines are how absolutely everything digital works. Whether it's a Moore machine or a Mealy machine, they are sort of the basis for absolutely everything that we do. That's changing though, and asynchronous computing was actually something I was particularly interested in at university. Where things didn't happen on a common clock, and you had no sort of guarantees of things being in the state you would expect them to be by the time you communicated with them. That's a story for one night when we've had a few whiskies or something. A vending machine. Well, I'd say arguably any system that exists is a prime example of a state machine. Discuss controversial opinions here on the CodeZone, or in the CodeZone. Right, so tonight what I wanted to try and achieve was, instead of placing a planet, we start placing the seed for a space station, and potentially then add a few more states that allow us to manipulate the space station. Yeah, that's right, Grumpy. I mean, a state machine can contain other state machines, and a state machine can also go up and down in a hierarchy of state machines. Now, one of the things I've already forgotten is actually how did we construct the space stations in the first place. So before I deleted code, I didn't actually quite delete the code. I kept sort of a lot of the stuff that we developed with the space station. So all of the collision things, all of the drawing routines, that's why I separated them out into routines, so that they're available for us to use as and when we need them. The thing that I have forgotten, though, is fundamentally what was the space station. And it was just a... well, I've already forgotten, haven't I? So I can't tell you. We'll need to have a look at... do I have any remnants of where the space station was? Up here. I think I got rid of it. There we go. Space station. So we had an object called a space station. Now, we're going to try and change this over to be entities now, but we'll have a look at this. What did space station actually contain? Oh, well, it contained modules, but the space station itself was just a vector of modules. There was nothing particularly clever about it. So maybe it's time to start thinking about how we can do this in the ECS way. Which we shouldn't be a million miles off having, because when we constructed this, the module class itself, this is a module template, by the way, so that's a little bit different, but the module class itself didn't actually contain very much, and anything it did contain was all based on ID. So I'm reasonably confident we can somehow convert this over to ECS. Good. So we've got some state machine aficionados in the chat. Excellent. That's probably the nerdiest thing I've ever said. No, I'm using ent, standard ent. Yeah, I'm not doing a self-made ECS. There's no value. I've mentioned before, people assume that I do everything from scratch. That's not the case. I want us to just get on with it. You are certainly allowed to post links. Whether Twitch allows them to be seen, I don't know. And if it doesn't, don't ask me to sort it out. You may have to post it on the Discord instead. One of the mods might actually be able to post it. For those playing along at home. Winner, winner, chicken dinner, eh? Right. I'm completely distracted now. So, right, what are we doing? We want to place a space station. So we need to create a component that somehow begins to sort of represent our space station, don't we? So let's go back into our main game and start looking at our components. Got all the Dave Jones fans coming out in the chat now. Excellent, good stuff. Thanks to good old Breck on the Discord server, I was actually in a video with Dave Jones, although you've no idea who I was. Right. Here are our components, and this is our ECS, so I'm just going to throw more components in here and then construct an entity which represents the satellite system. So I guess we probably want something that says, I am a space station. Let's start there. Why not? Comp space station. Now, one of the things that I've not yet played with in Ent is how complicated an object can the components be? Do they need to be just sort of trivial constructions of data, or can they actually be objects in their own right and actually function as objects? Because I think it would be quite useful to sort of contain some more sophisticated information in this space station. Yeah, I believe the components can be arbitrary. Looking at how Ent's constructed, I think that's the case. But then I was wondering, is it doing some clever hashing? But it would probably be able to do that even if the objects were slightly more sophisticated. I'm not too worried. We had a whole performance discussion in a past episode about whether ECS is better for this than object-oriented. One of the things is ECS, I think, is better for this application, mainly because we're going to be creating all these new random and wacky objects, but also because I wanted to do something a bit different to object-oriented programming. I'm also informed, and this started an interesting discussion on the Discord server, that I can quite happily use an empty struct as a component, which is a useful thing because sometimes you just want the object to have the component, but the component needn't contain any useful information. It's just like something like a component selected. Like just by virtue of owning that component or having that component associated with the entity, that it means something. And then that went on to a slightly more philosophical debate. Well, what is an empty struct to the C++ compiler? And I must confess, I don't know. And nor do I care that much. I'm not particularly into how compilers work. But it did occur to me that, well, this doesn't really exist, but apparently it does according to the specification, and it consumes memory as well, which I thought was terribly odd, because surely any compiler worth its salt would just optimize this away. Even if it's used somewhere, fundamentally it doesn't store anything, therefore it can't ever have its state changed, and therefore it can't necessarily mean anything to a program. So, interesting stuff, and there was a good debate on the Discord server by those that actually know those things. You'll be creating a game engine in the future, and I have a detailed idea. Okay, what tips and tricks? Absolutely the easiest, biggest, most important tip or trick is this. Design the game, then make the engine. Right? That's far more important. Too many people creating engines, and that's all very well and good, but then they design them trying to think it's going to work for every possible game, and it doesn't. So you end up with a piece of software which is useless at almost everything, and not desirable by anybody. So, but what you'd rather have is people using it or yourself using it for a finished product. So, work on the finished product, and then if you can see that there's potential to extract some of what you've created and reuse it, then that's your game engine. Yeah, see, empty structs are 1 byte wide. that just puzzles me. Definitely not stalling because I've completely forgotten how to do what I want to do. So we're going to have a space station, and we know that the space stations are also going to have a position component, and they're also going to be an orbit as well. So we can actually reuse some of the components that we've got here, and that's entirely the point. In fact, we can reuse position, we can reuse selectable, we can reuse orbit. Now, just to keep the game sensible, my space stations are going to orbit things, but they're not going to self-rotate. So the planets eventually will have like their own day cycle, as it were, and they will rotate on their primary axis. But the space stations are not going to do that. And that's because I think it would start to get very confusing if you're trying to edit the space station and it's rotating. If you ever play a game like Anno or SimCity, how often do you actually rotate the camera? And I'm willing to bet it's not very often. And that's because I believe you build up this sort of mental map of the layout of your game that you've spent hours creating. It's easier for you to know, well, if I just go down to the bottom left, that's where my power stations are, than having to sort of navigate your own city all the time to work out where things are going. So I think you actually rotate the camera very infrequently on those sort of things. Yeah, the game engine thing, I mean, don't take that too harsh. I don't want to put anybody off, but focus on the game first, and then focus on whether there is an engine to be had out of it. It's slightly different because I sit on the side of, well, I have developed a game engine, and people are using it. So that's a slightly different use case. But certainly, don't forget I created the original console game engine and pixel game engine so I could make videos. That was the purpose of those pieces of technology. The purpose wasn't to create something for other people to use. The purpose wasn't to create an engine. It was so I could make visualizations for my videos quite easily. That was the purpose, and then out of that, other people sort of started using it, and some people liked it, and we are today. Yeah, see, there we go, Dan. So you rotate back to a known position. Yeah. Yeah, I think everybody does, right? And particularly in Anno, maybe I'm a weirdo, but when I'm playing Anno 1800, you do pan the camera because it's a lovely game. It's great to look at, but I always then try and rotate it back to that one specific rotation where I can go, yeah, that's how it's supposed to look. I guess it's the OCD in me going, yeah, no, it's got to be at 84 degrees. That's precisely how I like it to be. Right, so we want to, instead of placing a planet, we're going to create a new entity. So let's go down to choose orbital location. We've pressed the S key. Now we may want to add some more states, but for today I'm just going to immediately bang out this planet instead. So here we're creating the planet. Instead, let's create a space station. So we want to get the position. That's the same thing, and a lot of this is actually the same thing. We just don't want to create the planet. So we'll create instead space station. Now we know that our space station struct doesn't actually have any properties to speak of. That's interesting. It's expecting some arguments. So if I just pass in a 0 there, is that okay? I guess that's because it's expecting it's the blank component type, but it's no, it's not having it. Not having it. Looks like it needs something. Dandestein has played with these, and you're my oracle now in Ent. You have to tell it which. Oh, God's sake. Right. Okay. Yeah. No. Can we just rewind that bit of reality, please? Okay, yeah, that didn't happen. So now we've got our entity, we've got its marker, we've told it it's a space station. We want to position it. It doesn't have a size anymore. Oh, it does have a size. Now that's interesting. The selectable thing required a radius, and we've not yet worked that bit out. So I'm going to just specify that the radius for now is let's just pick a number, literally out of thin air to begin with. It's going to have the position component, and that position component is going to get set later on. It's literally the position component gets updated by the orbit primary system later on. So all of that remains the same. So now we need a system which can render space stations, which is something we don't have. And I think our space station component is going to be more complicated, because I think it's useful at this point to have the space station actually be an object. Now, whether we can compose the space station out of the other components or not, I think is actually a bit trickier. You may think, well, let's add every single module that we add to our space station, let's treat it as a component. But we can't do that because we can only have unique components added to one entity. We can't have lots of the same component added to an entity. It was Gorbit's fault. It's always Gorbit's fault. And it's definitely his fault because it was his birthday yesterday. Good. I'm glad we're all in agreement. It was definitely Gorbit's fault. So let's add a system then to draw now the space station, and that's where we're going into slightly unknown territory. So where was my system select selectables, system update orbital positions? Here we go, system render planets. So we're going to create another system. Void system render space stations. Now, it may be the case later on that we want to sort of pre-cache an overall rendering of the space station and just draw that, rather than now go through all of the rigmarole of drawing the individual doors, and modules, and all of the rotated components. But I guess we first need to extract everything that identifies as a space station. So we create a view, and a view is this sort of container that is a selection based on the components that we want to add. So we want the position, we need to know if it's selectable or not. Is that something we care about in this case? I don't think it is, really. Yeah, we don't care if it's selectable, but we do care that it identifies as a space station. I wonder what it will fill in on its sensors. What am I missing? Oh, I can't call it station because I think I've got a variable called station up here. Yes, so we're going to just pull that out for the time being. Now, I think my component, which is a space station, should probably contain a vector of modules, just as before. We might need that line in a minute, actually, so I'll just cache that for a second. What we got here going on now, so why can't we get... why have we got a red wiggly? Too many identifiers. It's the entity, it's a position... because the space station doesn't contain anything at the moment, so it can't be represented as an object. So we do actually need to go to our component and give it some properties. And that's okay, because I think what we will store in here is the vector of whatever was in our original space station, which was installed module v modules. You know what? I'm going to grab that. No, don't want you. Oh, hang on. We might want all of this, though, don't we? Do we want to just add the space station object to the component? Yeah, let's do that for the time being. So we're actually sort of fusing together object-oriented and entity component system here. Yeah, okay, let's do that. Let's keep it simple. And I'll not call it that. I'm just going to call it S. I'm going to keep it very simple. Let me just catch up with some of the chats. Did you miss that the baby was born yesterday and his name was Gorbit? No, but it's a good rumour to spread. I've got Ezekiel. How's it going? I caught your YouTube vids and glad to see you on Twitch. Oh well, welcome to the CodeZone. We've not much CodeZone left tonight, but no, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Well, I've had quite a few people follow. Sorry, I've had my notifications kind of turned down, so I couldn't hear them all. What I'm pointing to is that pointers are not bad. Type inference through pointers are. Obviously, there's a conversation going on somewhere there, which I've missed a bit of. Polymorphism being possible does not make it a good idea. See, this is what always people fall into. They're either pro-OOP or anti-OOP. Why is nobody in the middle ground going, both are okay, actually? And look, they complement each other in methods exactly like this. Jumpy Lion, hello, welcome to the CodeZone. What are you doing? We are in episode, what are we up to? 18. Episode 18 of the CodeZone, where we're making basically SimCity in space. And whilst we're doing this, I don't know if you're familiar at all, I happen to have a YouTube channel with lots of videos on about coding things. And for the time being, I'm doing some Twitch streaming where we're coding everything live. So a bit of a change and a different pace as well. I like objects when they make sense. I dislike strict adherence to OOP taught in schools. Yeah, OOP taught in schools is pretty bad. Oh, well, thank you, Jumpy Lion. Much appreciated. Shivix, hello. Right, so, completely. The trouble is, I enjoy reading the chats, but then I completely lose my position. Rendering space stations. There we go. So we now know that the station component actually contains a space station, so that's a good thing. We just need to look at where we're drawing. Why have I got a red wiggly down here? Oh, that was in that bit of code. Update satellite mode. Ooh, we may have to have a play with that as well at some point. It's going to get very tricky. For the time being, I'm not going to be doing the editing of the space station tonight, but I do want to get on with drawing it. So I think draw space station module. That was the function we created. Let's have a look at what that was doing. And that's using, that's using this special tiled transformed view. So I'll have to have a look at that too. I need to update the camera for that view as well, else we're not going to see anything. But all of that looks like it's just fine and dandy. So did I not have a function which was overall draw the particular satellite being drawn? No, okay, I just iterated through all of the modules. So let's do the same thing. Okay. Where are we up to? Where are we up to? We've rendering. There we are. So this is going to be our station. Station dot. Oh yeah, that was it. We just sort of directly broke into the vector, didn't we? There we go. So I'm going to go through all of the modules associated with that space station, and then I'm going to draw them in a particular location. Now, where is that location? Unknown is the answer at the moment. It could be in the middle of the sun at this rate. But I do need to at least add one object to the space station when we create it. It's all getting very messy, and as usual, I'll go away and tidy this up a little bit and then talk through some of the changes in the next episode. But I've lost the code. I've lost the code which adds something to my space station. Where was it? It's down here. Perfect. Don't want the space station to just be empty space. That's not going to work very well for us. So instead, oh dear, I want the space station to at least have one object when it's created. So I will populate this object. So if I have C space station S like this, and then do S dot MV modules, can I just literally put that in? Is it going to be smart enough to know how to copy that over? I hope so. What's that being shoved in as? I've got a feeling, yeah, that's interesting. So when this goes out of scope, assigns the given component to an entity, a new instance of the given component is created and initialized with the arguments provided. The component must have a proper constructor or be of aggregate type. Then the component is assigned to a given entry. I don't think that's going to work very well. We may have to play with that a little bit. It may be the case that we have to grab that later and actually insert some objects to it. Well, we'll worry about that in a minute. So for now, what I want to do is get rid of this function. We're going to have to come back to this later on. So I'll comment this out actually with this style. don't see me using this style very often. And that's why I hate it. It never works. If you're using it sort of internally, it's just rubbish. I don't know why they don't do nested comments like that. They should do. Somebody get onto the committee and complain at them. Right, so what are we missing now? We've got the module. There should be a single module. The thing that's missing is I have no idea where it's going to draw this in space, because it's using the tile transform view, which at no point do we actually set up or configure in this new way of doing things. Let's just see if it even compiles. I've got a feeling specifying the station like that as an argument isn't going to work when we're creating the entity. It seems to like it, but I've got a feeling it's bad. So let's select the planet. We press S and I click. Okay, so it has put something there. It's not drawing it. See, I would have thought it's actually... That's interesting. So, because it's now selected, but I'm not unselecting it ever. That's interesting. I was kind of expecting that the space station is probably being drawn very, very small in the middle of the sun. Maybe we can see for ourselves. Let's try drawing one of these somewhere in the middle. Oof. No, I don't think we'll get to see it. Oh, let's just see if we can hack in. Let's hack in the camera control just for this one instance. Because it'll be useful to see, just to see if we've got the camera. So the reason we can't see anything is the satellites are drawn on a different transform plane. They're drawn on this tiled transform view. So that needs to be handled separately to the other camera control code that we've been using. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically, for now, I'm just going to duplicate these in the other camera functions. They're not going to do anything or change, but they're hopefully going to reflect each other's position. Let's just see if that works as a bit of a hack. So if I take you there. So you can see they actually look the same, but whereas one... Oh, that's interesting. That's already tile transform view. Oh, that's because I'm in handle, pan and zoom, edit space station. Oh, dear me. We don't want that there. But it's interesting to know that I've actually got a function, which I've completely forgotten about, which actually does what we want. So perfect. So I can call you there. And I'm also going to call you there. Is that a good thing to do or a bad thing to do? It's probably a bad thing to do. So I think instead I will just grab you. This could possibly just not work at all. It's like sort of last roll of the dice just to see if we can get anything to kind of work here. TTV, TTV. But I don't think it will. We've not really done any correlation between the two different camera planes. But that's the kind of boring stuff to debug off stream, not on stream. So if I just zoom in to the middle, we shouldn't have anything there. Let's select a planet. Let's draw something. Can't see anything. Don't know if it's selecting it or drawing it. Don't know. But we're out of time. We've overrun. That's our hour for tonight. Oh, no. So let's have a look at the chat. What have we got? Grumpy Game Dev is a procedural programmer who prefers his code declarative. Very good. But on the other side, Julian Nichols is oop. Forcing everything to be oop or procedural is bad. See, this is the problem. Nobody ever just goes, well, you know what? I like both. Jumpy Lion, I saw you also know in Scripton. I tried to make CMake with emcmake CMake, and I've got no idea and have no idea what it is. Well, I call it C-break for a reason, which is basically the opposite of how you should do. A lot of oop advocates. Well, we've moved on. Different conversation. Typed systems. Ooh, no. Station has stealth generators. Must be Romulans. Yeah, there's definitely something going on here. It needs a bit of thought because I think it's probably drawing it, but it's drawing it off camera. Need to sort that one out. We'll have a think about that later. The grumpy game dev. Not just hubris, but also spelling. Don't know. Obviously missed something out there. So, anyway, that is me done for tonight. Now, Danny Cron was going to promise us somebody to raid, but failed to give me any information about it. So, on that, I'm just going to say thank you all for watching, and I'll upload this to YouTube for those that have missed it. I'll see you all maybe on Sunday. Take care.